And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, available on iTunes and Stitcher and Pacifica Radio Network and SoundCloud and more. I'm really excited to have back as a repeat guest, Frans de Waal. He's a primatologist. He's the C.H. Candler Professor in Emory University's Psychology Department, and he's the director of the Living Links Center at the Yerkes National Primate Research Center. Great to have you back.
Thank you.
And you have a Facebook public page that people can find by searching your name.
Yeah.
Your new book is Mama's Last Hug, Animal Emotions and What They Tell About Ourselves.
Yes.
So you're ranked by Time as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. How would you like your work and words to influence the world?
Oh, I think my main goal in the publications is usually in the popular ones, is usually to make a connection between human and animal behavior. And people don't consider themselves animals, but I consider humans animals. And so I bring animals up a little bit and humans down a little bit to bring them closer together. And I think this whole idea that we are strikingly different, that we are special, I think is a wrong idea. I think it's a human illusion that we have. We have big brains. That's a good thing, but they're not different. Our brains are not fundamentally different from, let's say, primate brains. They're just a little bit bigger. So that's all there is to us.
Okay, that's a start. I want deeper. I understand you're in the process of retiring and moving to the next stage of your life, lecturing, which is great. But what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I think that goal to bring humans and animals closer and to make people realize that they are part of the natural world, that they are a product of evolution. I think that's the goal that I have set myself. And that has all sorts of implications. That has
that's what I want.
Has moral implications of how you treat animals. It has implications for how you treat the world. I think part of the crisis we live in at the moment, the climate crisis, is because we humans, we have thought we are not part of nature. We can do whatever we want with nature. We are the bosses here. As it turns out, we can play the boss if we want to, but we also are part of the system. And if we are not careful, we're going to go under with the system. And so this whole idea that we are separate from nature has implications, and it has, until now, it has had a lot of negative implications also.
You know, since I interviewed you last, I got to know Darshan Narvaez. Are you familiar with her work?
I think so, yeah.
She writes about how we evolved to take care of each other, and a very different perspective on human evolution from, say, Hobbes. And I've also interviewed Daniel Quinn, who wrote Ishmael. Did you ever read that?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And what you just described made me think of that, you know, that we humans have such hubris to believe that we are so much better than the animals. And I believe that humans weren't always this way. Have you looked much at anthropology and at indigenous cultures and how indigenous cultures compare to primates?
No, I'm pretty sure this is a new thing. It's the idea that we are separate from nature and that we are superior. In Western thought, it goes back to the Greeks probably. So religion has picked it up, but it is even older than our current religions, I would say. But I personally think that it probably started when we became agriculturalists and that we started to keep animals. So when you're a hunter, and most of our evolutionary history, we have been hunter-gatherers. If you're a hunter, you have respect for the animal. If you're hunting an elephant or whatever the big animal is you're hunting as a group of humans, you're going to respect that animal. You know that it will put up a fight. It will try to escape. And I don't think hunters have that kind of attitude, like we are superior. No, they are a part of nature, and they do their work within that context. But when we started becoming agriculturalists, we Well, sorry about that. But I'm turning this off. Yeah. Okay. So when you can you cut that out?
Yeah, I can edit it out.
Yeah. So when you start to keep animals for food, and and then of course you are dominant over these animals. You are in charge of these animals, and they are your property also. Then you develop this different attitude, this attitude that you are superior to them. And I think we use that also to justify what we do to animals. So we have a whole story for ourselves that we are superior beings, and that means that we can do whatever we want with animals. So I think that's a recent thing. Agriculture is maybe 12,000 years old, and with agriculture came our modern religions, and I think it's all built into that system.
And you talk about human exceptionalism. Now, in the last year, I've interviewed a couple people about American exceptionalism.
Oh, gee,
Talk
yeah.
about human exceptionalism.
Yeah, human exceptionalism is present in many academic disciplines. So, for example, anthropology is very much focused on what is special about humans. That's very much their focus. They have entire conferences on what makes us unique. And they don't necessarily say anymore that we are superior. They have learned that that's not the right thing to say. But they say we are the most successful species. We are absolutely the ecologically most successful species, even though I think we are destroying the planet. And in that sense, I don't think we are so particularly successful. But that's the phrasing they have now. But yeah, there's entire disciplines, philosophy, anthropology, most of the social sciences, a lot of the humanities. They put humans on a pedestal, and they come up with different arguments all the time. And so in one of my books, my previous book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? I sort of go through all the claims that have been made about where we are more intelligent than other species, and there's very little that can be maintained. I think for language you can say yes, we are the only ones with language, and that's a very special characteristic, but there's a lot of others that have come. For example, in the 50s, 1950s, the big claim was yes, animals sometimes use tools, but we humans are the only ones who make tools, and that makes us totally different. That is really what sets us apart. Until, of course, we had observations both from the wild and from captivity that primates, and now we know also birds, can make tools. You can give them certain materials that are not usable in the current form, but that they need to modify in order to make tools out of them, and they do that kind of things. And so that's one of the many claims. Other claims have to do with theory of mind. Other claims have to do with consciousness, consciousness being something that we cannot measure. So it's easy to make that kind of claims. And so there's an enormous amount of claims of what sets humans apart. And each one has sort of been dropped after 5 years or 6 years because of research that we do. And I don't know what the current claim is. So I have sort of trouble keeping up with them. But we always come up with a new claim of why we are special.
Why do you think people do that?
It's a deep desire for us to be different. And different also means superior. So it's not just different, because an elephant is also different. No, we are different and superior.
So in Mama's Last Hug, animal emotions and what they tell us about ourselves, what are the most important lessons to make sure we get them in our hour that you want to impart to readers from this book?
Yeah, the book, the title of the book relates to an encounter between, and then you can find it on the internet if you look for it.
Yeah.
Because it has been seen millions of times, an encounter between my professor, Jan van Hoof, who went into the night cage of Mama, the chimpanzee, to say goodbye when she was 59 and she was dying. And it's a very special encounter because we never go in with an adult chimpanzee. That is sort of stupid thing to do. But since he was so weak, and since he had known her for 40 years, he could do that.
You knew her for a really long time too.
Yeah, I gave her name actually, and I knew her for an equally long time. But I was not around when this happened in the Netherlands. And so people were extremely moved by that encounter and how Mama embraced him and he embraced her and so on. And that they were moved, I could fully understand. But they were also very surprised. So they were surprised how human-like the expressions of Mama were, her sounds, her hand gestures. They were surprised how human-like all her emotions seemed to be. And that is why I took that as for the title of the book, because why are people surprised? In the sense that we have been saying for 50 years that chimpanzees are our closest relatives. They share 98.5% of our DNA, so they're very similar to us. So why are people then surprised that the emotional expressions and the emotions themselves are probably very similar? And so,
well, one more thing.
yeah.
In the book, you talk about how we separated in the evolutional tree around 6 million years ago from our predecessors, as did chimpanzees and bonobos. Does that mean they are more recent on the evolutional scale as well?
Well, it means that since that point, 6 million years ago, they have evolved just as much as we have. And so they have changed. They have not changed in the same direction as we have, clearly. They did not become bipedal, for example, which is one of the main differences between us and them. But for example, the brains were very similar in size. Our big brain expansion occurred only like 1 million years ago. So that is much more recent. So we split, and our ancestors started walking on 2 legs, and they kept in the forest basically. But the thinking of many people is that we evolved and they stood still. But since that point, 6 million years ago, we have both changed tremendously. And maybe the chimps even more than us, because there's some indications, genetic indications, that there's more diversity among the chimpanzees.
And I don't think that most people think about that the living primates today actually evolved to their current state just like we did. I mean, I read that little offhand remark in your book and I go, wow, that was really surprising.
Yeah, we don't descend from the chimpanzee. We descend from an ancestor to both of us. And we don't know exactly what kind of animal that was, the ancestor. We don't know that exactly. So to go back to Mama's last hug, so I took that encounter between my professor and Mama the chimpanzee as an example to explain how the facial expressions are of the primates and of humans. They're extremely similar. There was a time where people said, well, obviously humans have more facial musculature because we need to convey many more shades of emotions. But 5 years ago, they analyzed the faces post-mortem of chimpanzees, and they found exactly the same number of muscles in the face of a chimp as of a human. So the chimp can convey all the same emotions and shades of emotions that the human can. And so I tried to explain how they express these emotions and why that is so similar. And basically, my message is that I don't think there are uniquely human emotions. I don't believe in that. I think that there's some emotions in humans that are maybe a bit more developed or a bit more sophisticated. But basically, the whole set of emotions that we humans have can be found in other primates.
And Darwin described this in his book, Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals, 150 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, Darwin was the first to make all these connections and to stress the face. And his book was very badly received later. At the time that he wrote it, was maybe well received, but it's the only book of Darwin that disappeared for a whole century, that was not in print, because we went through this whole dark period of behaviorism under Skinner and so on, who denied emotions. Even emotions in humans were not relevant according to them, and certainly the ones in animals were sort of fictional in their minds.
And what I loved about his book is he had photos in there. I mean, these from 1870, something like that, that Duchenne provided, where he used galvanic batteries. They didn't have generators yet to stimulate the muscles of patients' faces. And it described in the book how there was a risk that it might pop their eyeballs as an aside.
Oh, that seems like a bad experiment.
Well,
but yeah, he had a patient who had no facial nerve endings, I believe, and so he could not feel pain in the face. He was insensitive in the face. And so that's where he put all these electrodes and started to twist the muscles to see what kind of expressions he would get. Yeah.
And more recently, Paul Ekman, I think it was it Richie Davidson, did a study where they looked at that measurement that Duchenne described as a smile that involved the eyes, the lower orbicularis oculi pars palpebraeus, which is this section of the eye right in here that is essential in creating an authentic smile in people.
Yeah, the story is, and this comes from Paul Ekman, who actually gave the name Duchenne smile to that smile that involves the eyes. The story is that Duchenne tried to get a real smile out of his patient by stimulating all sorts of muscles, and he never got one that really looked good. And then one day he told a joke to the guy that he was testing, and that's where he got a real smile and a real laugh out of him. And that's where he decided that these muscles around the eyes are extremely important to convey the real smile. And that's where the word Duchenne smile comes from.
I love that, because I got into smiling back in the 80s when I was working with biofeedback and surface electromyography. And I would put electrodes here to measure the zygomaticus, the main smile muscle. And I would tell people to smile as hard as they could and really work at it. And they would strain, and I'd get a reading. And then I would let them rest, and then I would tell jokes to them, and the reading would be 2, 4, 5 times higher. And so that subconsciously they could activate their muscles far more powerfully than if they were trying their hardest to. And that always fascinated me. And it kind of taught me that we have a power within us that if we learn how to activate it, it's far more than if we try to think it through.
Yeah. That's also why, if you look at all these textbooks that have pictures of humans expressing emotions like anger or fear or happiness and so on, they always look totally fake to me. Because these are always actors that they ask, give us a laugh, you know? Because the real laugh is messier and is more animalistic, and it's not present in these actors. They make a laugh-like expression, but they always look fake to me. And so that's that whole literature on facial expressions in humans, where they present people with pictures and let them say what it means and so on, I think is flawed, but partly because it's all done by actors and it doesn't look real to me.
And you know, if you search for Mama's Last Hug on YouTube, you can see the last hug. You can actually see the video of it. And you describe in the book, what's remarkable about it is that Mama can smile in a way that humans can't. I think you describe it as inverting the lips.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, chimps can smile in a way that humans can't.
Yeah. So their lips are more flexible, and they can flip their lips around. And some animals do that regularly. Some almost never do that, but. Yeah, they have a more flexible lips than we do. There's all sorts of differences in expression, not just between humans and other primates. For example, you have all these animals like dogs and cats and horses who can do things with their ears, extremely expressive part of their body. If you look at a dog, what a dog does with the ears, we cannot do any of that. Our ears are just sticking out, sitting there, you know. So yeah, when people think that we have a rich array of expressions, they should think about other species with other things that they can do.
And you know, I've been involved in positive psychology since the mid 80s, and I got into measuring smile muscles and looking at them, and over the years I discovered that there are ways people smile off the face, you know, with the belly laugh, pulling their head back. Little toddlers wiggle their butts. Kids a little bit older will go like this with their elbows. I have a friend I play racquetball with, and he puts his fist out like that. I mean,
but this is all laughing. This is not smiling. So Jan van Hooft, the professor who embraced Mama, he made that big distinction between the laugh and the smile. We tend to look at the laugh and the smile as 2 points on one continuum, but the laugh is a totally different expression. It has a totally different origin. The origin of the laugh is in play behavior, tickling. It comes with sounds, of course. Sounds are very similar to between, let's say, a chimpanzee and a human laugh. We both laugh under these circumstances. The smile comes from a fearful expression. So the smile initially was nervous and fearful and submissive. Then it became an appeasement. So in many of the primates, let's say in baboons and macaques, it is used to appease the dominant. The dominant approaches the subordinate. The subordinate gives a smile to sort of to communicate that they are subordinate, and so he doesn't need to worry about them. And so it is an appeasement and a submissive gesture. And in humans, that's still visible, even though the smile has become very affectionate in humans, has become a very friendly signal. It is still an appeasement signal. And still, if you want to walk into a room with people who are potentially hostile, and if you smile, and that's why we smile when we greet each other, for example, it is a communication of, I mean no harm to you. That's still the communication that it gives.
And maybe that's the smile without the eyes that Ekman describes as the Shen smile.
Yeah, it is maybe more an you can fake it. Let's say it that way. You can fake that one. Yeah.
So are there other aspects of smiling and facial expression that primates can do that humans or can do or do that humans don't do?
We are better at frowning. So the chimpanzees and the other apes, they have very big bony eyebrow ridges, more prominent than in our species. And so for us, frowning is putting these corrugator muscles together here is easier than for the primates. But primates do frown when they're angry, for example, they may frown. So it does happen, but it is harder to see.
And, you know, there was I have a colleague from the world of biofeedback who at the time I think was at Emory working with John Buzmajian. I don't know if you know him,
Mm-hmm.
but Paul Fair did studies looking at smile and frown muscles in depressed and normal patients. And he found that people who were depressed had much stronger frown muscles and people who were not depressed had stronger smile muscles.
Oh, gee, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder, do primates get depressed?
They certainly can get depressed after events like losing the top rank, for example. So an alpha male who loses his position may go into a depression. A female who loses her offspring, for sure, will go into a depression. And she will hold on to her offspring for a long time, sometimes too long, sometimes for weeks, till the body completely falls apart. And during that period, these females may not eat, or maybe, yeah, they seem very depressed to me. They're not very active.
And how about love? Do primates love?
I would think so. The whole system of love and attachment is now being studied. It's interesting that Paul Ekman, when he made his 6 basic emotions, he did not include love. So love is not a basic emotion in his scheme. And that's one of the problems I have with Paul Ekman's 6 basic emotions, because I think love and attachment are very basic and very important for all the mammals. And we now study the attachment system, of course, in rodents and the whole oxytocin system that is involved. And it's very similar between humans and between the rodents. So, for example, when people fall in love, you can measure a rise in the oxytocin in the blood. So oxytocin goes up when they fall in love. And we know from the studies on rodents that oxytocin receptors are involved in bonding. And if you block these receptors, then the bonding is not so highly developed. So that whole system is very similar, it seems, neurologically in humans and other species. And so if we call it love in humans, love and attachment, I don't see why we shouldn't call it the same way. We also know from rodent studies, for example, that they go into a depression when they lose a mate. So these are monogamous rodents where they test these things on. So they have a bond between male and female. If their mate disappears or dies, they go into a depression, and you can measure the rise in cortisol. So corticoids, basically. And so the system is very similar.
So there's been recent studies on attachment between humans and their babies, and this whole concept of attachment theory, that if you don't develop healthy attachment between the mother, that it leads to pathology down the line. Is there something similar to that happens in primates?
Yeah, I think it's probably extremely similar. Of course, the first one who did these studies was Harry Harlow in Wisconsin, who was inspired, I think, by the attachment theory, and then started isolating baby monkeys, isolating them from their mom. So taking a baby monkey away from the mother and then putting them in isolation, and see how screwed up basically these baby monkeys became. And so, yeah, that was a very traumatic event, and it very drastically alters the behavior of a young monkey. So I think that attachment system is very similar between humans and other species. And the consequences of when it goes wrong are also very similar, I think. So, for example, the orphanages, the US used to have orphanages with a mortality rate of 95%. And this is remarkable. They changed the law on that, actually, partly under the influence of Harlow's monkey studies, because Harlow would always say that attachment was natural and that monkeys don't develop very well without a real mother. And the orphanages in the US, they were based on the Skinnerian principles. Like, all you need to do as a kid is reward them at the right time and punish them at the right time, and that's all you need to do with them. They don't need love and affection. That's not really part of the system. And so the orphanages were based on the wrong principles, and they had a very high mortality rate, which shows that if you don't provide affection and you don't provide playtime, and you just keep kids in boxes, then they die. Their immune system deteriorates, and their stress levels go up, and so on. The Romanian orphanages were also based on that principle. I don't know if you know those studies, but the Romanian orphanages were notorious. All these kids were all in deep emotional trouble when they came out.
That's tragic. Oh man. So along those lines, you refer in the book to two videos. One is a capuchin monkey in the wild cracking nuts with stones, and another is a buffalo herd driving lions away from a calf, protecting the calf. And you say that the second gets a lot more views because it pulls our heartstrings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fascinated by pulling heartstrings. It's a huge industry, pulling heartstrings.
Mm-hmm.
Movies and books and evening news. What is pulling heartstrings? Is there a primate version of that? And what's the evolutional tie to I think about heartwarming and that whole concept. Can you talk about that?
Well, we identify and we have empathy. So when we see a calf being grabbed by lions, we identify with the calf because that's the victim there, and we root for the calf. And then when the buffalo come and liberate it, we are very happy about that. And so there's also empathy involved. We sort of identify and we empathize with the calf, and we don't.
And the parents too. I mean,
Yeah, we don't necessarily empathize with the lions, because the lions, of course, are missing a meal here, which is an important part for them. So we actually root for the victim in this case. So yeah, we have a strong tendency for empathy, and this is something you can see in other species as well. We do a lot of studies now on empathy in other species. But the point I wanted to make is that this is an emotional event, and we identify and we get involved in it, whereas a more intellectual accomplishment, like a monkey who is cracking nuts with stones, which is a wonderful thing to see and very accomplished, we're not particularly, that doesn't move us so much. We're maybe interested in that at an intellectual level, but it doesn't move us very much.
So, so much of this book is about seeing through the eyes of primates. And how does that affect the way you see the world?
Well, I do look at humans. I don't trust what humans tell me. I'm a biologist who lives in a psychology department. I'm a professor in psychology, And the psychologists are very much, they believe what people tell them. They give them lists with questions and they fill out these lists and they go with that kind of data. And I prefer to go with behavioral data, so what I can see. And so that's also how I look at the human species. And so, for example, if I see a politician on TV telling us this or that, I'm not really particularly trusting. I trust his body language a lot more than what he tells us he's going to do or he wants to do. And so I'm very much an observer, and I'm very distrustful of what people tell me about themselves. And that's also why, for example, all the research on emotions in humans, well, not all, but a lot of it is basically research on feelings. It's not a research on emotions. It's research on what people tell them that they're feeling. So it goes through that filter of what I, as a subject, want you, the professor, to know about me. So that's always colored, I think. People. If you ask people, are you empathic or are you a jerk? I think most of them will say I am empathic, because they know that that's a good thing to say, and that's a positive thing to say about yourself.
What's the difference between emotions and feelings?
Oh, I think the feelings are private states. The feelings I cannot see. I can see your emotions. I can measure your emotions. The feelings I have to hear from you. The feelings are private states that we communicate through language. And so you have to become conscious of your feelings. Otherwise, you cannot talk about them. So they have to reach your level of consciousness, which is already a big thing, I think. And then you have to interpret them and tell me about them. So it goes through many filters. And it's very hard for me to know what your feelings are. You can describe them to me, but when you say you are sad, how do I know that that's the same way as when I am sad? I'm not sure about that. And with animals, we have, of course, even the bigger problem that for me, it's hard to know the feelings of a chimpanzee or of a dog, for that matter. But I think the same problem we have with humans. For humans, it's a private state. And emotions are always expressed in the body. Emotions, if you say you were very emotional at a particular point and your body didn't do anything, then you're lying, because your body will always react when you're very emotional. So your body, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your brain activity, your temperature, everything reacts to your emotions. So your emotions are very bodily. And they're very similarly in the body. So for example, fear, we say we get cold feet. And that has actually been measured. If you put people in fearful situations, the temperature of their feet goes down. That's because when you're fearful, the body starts to withdraw blood from the extremities and put it into action, because potentially when you're fearful, you need to come into action and start running or whatever you need to do. And in rats, for example, if a rat is fearful, the temperature of the feet and the hands also go down, and the temperature of the tail also goes down. And so it's the same principle. And so the fear reaction in the body is very similar across the board. And this is true for many emotions, I think. In the body, it's always expressed in similar ways.
Now, you mentioned that we filter things. Now, in my book, Bottom Up Revolution, I talked to neuroscientists, and they described how there's top-down processing and there's bottom-up processing. Bottom-up processing is the raw information that's coming in. Top-down processing is pretty much what our prefrontal cortex does to filter that raw information coming in. And from what I understand with humans, there's only a couple percent that is actually bottom up, that actually gets experienced. Most of it is our filtering at work. How is that for primates? Is it the same? Do they have more or less? I mean, being out in nature or in these zoos or whatever?
I'm not sure we know that. You mean how they filter the information that comes in?
Yeah.
I don't think we have studies on that. That's not a big topic, I think. So people do, of course, studies on perception, like let's say the visual cortex, and how information is used. But I'm not sure that we specifically look at that kind of filtering.
And you know what I learned was that with humans, you have some people who have too much of the top-down filtering, and they become like obsessive compulsive, and they get so restricted in what they're paying attention to. Or you get the opposite, where there's not enough filtering and they get to be like ADD, and their mind wanders all over the place and they're easily distracted.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
But
The bottom up versus top down view, I do know how to relate to that in terms of primate cognition, because we have a tendency in the studies of primates, but also of children, to take very big concepts and see if it's there or not. So, for example, theory of mind. Theory of mind is usually defined: do I understand your knowledge? Do I understand what you know? And do I have an understanding of your mental state, so to speak? And this is called a capacity that appears at the age of 4 or 5 in children. And there's a lot of debate: do primates have this capacity, yes or no? And it's treated like an all or nothing thing. Whereas I think all of these big capacities, also language, culture, and so on, all these big capacities can be broken down into much smaller ones. And then if you look at the smaller ones, you will find some of them in the primates and some of them not in the primates. And that's more like the bottom-up perspective, is that you look at all the subcomponents of a big capacity and see if it's present or not. And if you do that in children, for example, in development of children, what you get is that some of these things come up very early in life, maybe at the age of 1 or 2. Whereas the full-blown capacity of theory of mind, as they call it, comes up maybe only at 4 or 5. All these subcomponents are already coming up very early on. And that's what we call the bottom-up perspective to animal cognition, or cognition in general. And that's becoming much more popular. I think that's a much more sensible approach than having these all or nothing capacities.
And it was interesting because you described the chimpanzees' awareness of power, and how they could notice that the zoo director received deferential treatment from the other workers at the zoo, and the chimps could actually recognize that. That seems pretty amazing, really.
Well, it's not so hard for them, I think. They know all the human expressions. They have been around humans for long enough to know how we behave, and we are very similar, of course, in many ways. And so we can do the same thing. So why would we be surprised? You walk into a boardroom at the company, and you will know within a few seconds, I think within half a minute, you will know approximately what the rank order is among the people there. Even though people say we're all the same and we're not really hierarchical, they will have a hierarchy, because all humans always have hierarchies, and you will be able to recognize it right away. And I think that happens at the zoo also, is that the apes see that if this guy walks in, then everyone gets nervous. So he's probably very important. So that's not very hard to do for them. So
And
they're very good at reading body language. It's a bit like people are always surprised by dogs being so good at it. I think many animals are excellent at reading body language. And the reason is that they don't care about the regular language. They don't hear what we're saying. So that's all they have, the body. And they're very good at it.
And of course, the primates have their own power structures that you describe in a lot of detail in your discussion of alpha males and alpha females too.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'm not finished with you on seeing through primates' eyes either. I mean, you described how you approach research from it, but I have a feeling you've learned so much about primate emotion and interaction. I want to know how it's affected the way you relate to other people.
Yeah. So the alpha male and alpha female. So the word alpha male actually became popular after my book Chimpanzee Politics, which was used in Washington by Newt Gingrich and the Republicans at the time. And so that's after that the word alpha male became, and now it's thrown around all the time for our big leaders and so on. People tend to forget that there are also alpha females. People tend to think that hierarchies are a male thing. This is so odd to me, because you walk into a nunnery, or you walk into a nursery home where there's mostly women. You will see hierarchies among women all the time. And in all the primates, we see female hierarchies and we see alpha females, absolutely. And
And you
the alpha
describe in the
females are not necessarily nicer than the alpha males, I would say.
well,
So
you
uh,
say in your book that out that the females must use harsher measures to stay on top.
that was in the time that mama was the dominant over everybody. Yeah, so including males.
And then when she wasn't the dominant over everyone, she enabled
Yeah,
the next dominant. Nikki, was it?
yeah. She was very much the sort of the leader of the females. She was the alpha female, and so she kept the females in line. If there was a power struggle among the males always go through these frequent power struggles that the females don't have, but the males have these. And mama would then pick a certain male that she preferred to become the alpha male, and she would make sure that all the females supported that male. And if a female deviated from that and supported a different male, then mama would be objecting to that. Yeah.
And what I love is Mama enables these alpha males to become the most powerful, and then when they fight, she mediates and calms down the fights.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It says a lot about the need for a female president.
Well, I think the females have certainly an interest in stability. The females have offspring, they have babies on their back, and they are not really served very well by all these power struggles among the males. That's not necessarily in their interest. And in the wild, of course, they can stay away from them because there's more space. But in captivity, the chimps in Arnhem lived on a very big island. Still, they're present. And so the females tend to try to stabilize things. They try to keep things calm because that's in their interest. And that's why mama would mediate and bring the parties together and arrange reconciliations between the males and so on.
And you've done research and you've looked at reconciliation, and you talk about it in terms of peace.
Yeah.
So what do you have to bring to us in terms of what we can learn from primates about making peace and reconciliation?
So yeah, I started my work actually looking at reconciliations after fights, which in chimpanzees means kissing and embracing. So after a fight, the two opponents may come together and kiss and embrace. And after that, there's now maybe 400 studies of reconciliation in the primates. And there's experiments on this. And the dominant idea in all this literature on peacemaking in the primates is what is called the valuable relationship hypothesis, which is that if animals need each other for one reason or another, or there's a certain value to their relationship, that's when they will make peace. If they don't need each other, if they can live independently, or that other individual is totally no use to them, or even worse, it's a stranger who lives in another group, then peacemaking is almost impossible and hardly occurs. And so if you ask what is the lesson, if you want to have peace in the world, you need to make people more mutually dependent. And so foster relationships between them that are valuable to them. A good example of that is the European Union. That's how the European Union got started. The Brits have lost track of this and have forgotten about this at the moment with their Brexit. But the European Union started to prevent wars between Germany and France. That was the main thing. These were the two big countries on the continent, and they had had so many wars over so many centuries that the idea was if we tie them together economically so that they have a mutual interest in each other's economies, then maybe so that's a valuable relationship hypothesis right there in practice, and it has worked very well in Europe. It has prevented a lot of wars that we otherwise would have had probably. So that's the hypothesis that we have for the primates, and I would say it works the same for humans probably.
Now, I think part of Brexit is about the response to immigrants.
Yeah.
To the stranger, to the outsider. How do primates deal with outsiders?
Well, that depends. We have two close relatives. One is the chimpanzee, who is male-dominated and very hostile to strangers. They're xenophobic. They kill strangers. And we have the bonobo, equally close to us, who is female-dominated and mixes with strangers. So the bonobo groups in the wild is known that when they meet, there's a little bit of hostility sometimes, but then they sit down and then they groom and they have sex and the kids play with each other. So it looks more like a picnic than like warfare, and that's the bonobo way. So we are equally close to them, and so you can pick and choose what comparison you want to make. We have certainly xenophobic tendencies. Our species has hostility to strangers, I think. But we are also capable of making friends with strangers. And I think during a lot of our history, when we were hunter-gatherers, and if you hear the stories about current hunter-gatherers, there's a lot of networking that goes beyond the group. It's not just in the group that the social networks are. When the networks go far and wide, and there's a lot of trade and marriage exchange and traveling through the territories of others and so on. And so humans have that capacity also of getting along with strangers.
And let's get back to seeing through the eyes of primates. I want to get an idea. You've learned so much about their emotional expression and the way they relate to each other. How has it changed the way you relate to people, to the world?
Well, I'm not sure it has changed how I treat people, or I observe people more than other people do. I'm pretty sure, but I've always been an observer. That was even before I got my current profession. So I'm sort of natural observer, and I like to watch people and try to understand what's going on between people. If I see social scenes, and so let's say if I'm in a restaurant and something happens at a table, I keep track of a lot of things that are going on. So I'm very used to that. But I don't think that's because of my profession. I think it's the other way around. I have this profession as primate watcher because I'm an observer, really, by nature.
Have primates inspired you?
Yeah, certain primates, certain leadership capacities of certain male chimpanzees or female chimpanzees, like Mama, has made a deep impression on me. And so when people talk about alphas in human society, they say that he's a real alpha male. I also always wonder what they mean, because for me, a real alpha male is also an individual who keeps the group together and keeps harmony in the group. And that's not always what people mean when they say he's a real alpha male. They sometimes mean more like he's a bully or something, and that's not really for me what the alpha males are about. So yes, I've seen individuals in that role. Also in bonobos, it's the top female, and you have good ones and you have bad ones in the same way as in humans. You have good leaders and bad leaders, and you have that same variation there.
So it's their leadership of keeping the group together and facilitating fairness that is what inspires you?
Yeah, the alpha position involves also keeping the peace and interfering in fights and stopping fights, protecting the underdog in fights. And if the leader doesn't do that, I've known males who are incapable of that, or who are very much bullies and only care about themselves, so to speak. Then they become very unpopular. And so I've seen leaders being deposed, and in the wild we have seen leaders being killed. So it doesn't always end well if a male doesn't perform that kind of role.
Now you've made comments about Trump. So where does he fit into this conversation?
I think his ascent to the position when he became the president, that was very chimp-like. He was very good at intimidating others and insulting them and giving them nicknames that were terrible, and that behavior was extremely chimp-like. But then when he was the alpha male, so to speak, when he became the president, he did not follow the rules that I know for alpha males, in the sense that he became a bully, and he was much more divisive. He was not a leader who brought the parties together. So in that sense, he doesn't fulfill the role of alpha male in my mind.
Okay, so you describe in the book how a researcher pretended to be a panther, and wore a panther mask and scared some chimps, and then after he escaped from them because they started going after him, he stood up and took off the mask and was it Mama? It was
Uh-huh.
Mama. Mama, unlike the other chimps who were kind of angry, you said she made a laugh face. So do primates have a sense of humor? Do they make jokes?
Yeah, I think primates understand humor. So one of the illustrations is that they like slapstick movies. Which is very physical comedy. So they like to see movies in which people fall off the ladder or get a pot of paint over their head or something like that.
They watch movies? I didn't know that.
In captivity, you can show them movies. And so also, if for example, if I walk into a room where there's chimpanzees and I stumble and I fall, they're all looking at you and they're following you. And then when you stand up and everything seems to be okay, they may show these laugh faces also, as if they think was sort of funny what happened there. And we humans do the same thing. We laugh when we are relieved, for example, about something. So yes, I think they have a sense of humor. And actually, if I were a student today, that's the thing I would probably investigate, because I think it's fascinating that they unexpected endings, which is really what humor is about. Because in jokes we talk about the punchline. That's an unexpected ending. That's when we laugh. I think you can present them with movie clips or something that have unexpected endings and see how they respond to that.
That's great. I just had a comedian on last week, and that's exactly what he said. A lot of humor is about providing an unexpected ending. You know, the rabbi, the priest go into the bar and unexpected ending.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you also talk in the book about the chimp Queef. Did I say that right?
Kuif, we call it Kuif.
Kuif, who you taught to bottle feed babies.
Yeah.
A baby. And first it was a deaf chimp's, and then her own, because she lost some babies because she couldn't breastfeed.
Yeah.
And from that, you talk about awe and gratitude, two other feelings or emotions. So I'm interested in awe and gratitude in primates.
Yeah. So she, since she lost her own babies first due to insufficient lactation, she was always extremely depressed when that happened, and so she really suffered from it, I think. And so one day when we had a baby available, a baby chimp from a female who didn't take care of it, we gave it to Kuif. And since that involved an enormous training program, like 6 weeks of training that I did with the baby on me, and then training Kuif to give the bottle to the baby. And then at some point after 6 weeks, I transferred the baby to her so that she had now the baby and she had to bottle feed it on her own. And all of that went well, because really holding a bottle and feeding a baby is not such a big deal for a chimpanzee. After that, I became sort of family for her. I was basically the father of the baby, of course, because the baby was first on me. It was my baby that she was having. And I had trained her, and this solved all her problems, because from then on also she was able to raise her own offspring with the bottle. So she was eternally grateful. I was really a family member for her, and she was extremely attached to me. And each time I came, she recognized me from long distances, and she was very happy to see me. So I interpret that as gratitude, as that she was grateful for what I had done for her.
But you also mentioned awe.
Yeah, in which context is this?
Talking about that experience.
Oh, you're frozen.
How about now?
Wait a second. You're now frozen.
I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello? No, you're frozen. Maybe he can. So he's frozen, and either he will call back in and we'll have this, and I will pause this until I
Something
gotta
wrong.
start. I forgot to turn the recording back on. So let me just start again.
Uh-uh.
Let's talk about psychopaths and narcissists. We talked about it in 2013, and you didn't have much to say then, but now you got something to say about it.
Yeah, so I look at psychopathy as a lack of empathy. And since we have quite a bit of evidence for empathy in the primates and in other mammals, potentially they can have that same condition, of course. I look at psychopaths as the psychopath is mentally capable of putting themselves in your shoes. So they have a theory of mind about others, but it doesn't come with a lot of emotions and a lot of emotional investment. And so potentially the primates could have that. I remember that together with Scott Lilienfeld, who is a specialist in psychopathy.
Had him as a guest.
You had him as a guest. So together with Scott and his students, we asked animal caretakers to evaluate all the chimpanzees on their personality, and the psychopathy dimension came out of that study. That doesn't mean that we had real psychopaths in the study, but the dimension at least came out of it. So we think it is a possibility that there is. But you know, in humans, what is the number? Psychopaths are maybe 1 in 1,000 or something, or maybe 2 in 1,000. I don't know. We working with, let's say, 25 chimps, and we consider that a big number. But the chance of finding these.
So what do chimps do if there's a narcissist or a psychopath in their midst?
Well, I think they would not be very kind to them necessarily, because it's all a whole system of reciprocity in chimpanzees. It's like you do something for me, I do something for you. If you have someone who doesn't care about others, I think they will pick up on that, and they will not be necessarily very kind to that individual.
And that's what you described they do with alpha males who are inappropriate bullies.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a wrap. I promised to get you out by 11, and so I thank you so much for being on the show. My guest for this show has been Frans de Waal. He's a primatologist. He's the C.H. Candler Professor in Emory University Psychology Department, and his newest book is Mama's Last Hug. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
being
You're
on
welcome.
the show.
Thank you.